introduction to our members who are listening. This is to all welcome. A minor hiccup which has delayed us a few minutes, but we're delighted to have Richard Madra back in communication with us. Richard, I think, will be known to many of you as he has been a supporter of our Yorkshire Geology Day enterprise at Cap House over a number of years. I think that's correct, Richard.
It is. I keep turning up with pathological ammonites, don't I?
Yeah. The only thing, therefore, I could say is, well, it's a delight to have Richard. I hope he's going to explain to us or define pathology, because I wasn't sure whether he was a paleontological pathologist or a pathological paleontologist, but he'll no doubt make that clear. And this, I think, is going to be an entertaining and certainly is going to broaden the experience and knowledge of many of us. Now, I think final piece of housekeeping. I think Paul, you're moderator in this, and you'll deal with questions as they, if and as they arise.
Yep, I'll do that.
And I think our pattern is that we don't interrupt the speaker unless he asks anybody to do so. But later on, we then, by show of hands, demonstrate who wishes to ask a question. Would that be fair? Is that the way ahead?
We use the Q&A function. So there's a Q&A function on the bottom of the recording, and you can click on that and you can type out your question, and then we can unmute you at the end if you wish to read out your question. And if you don't wish to read out your question, then Paul can read it for you.
And I'll do the vote of thanks at the end.
Okay then, Richard, over to you.
All right, let's hope this works now then. All right, you should be able to see. Can you all see my slideshow now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. It's on sharing screen. Does that come through?
You've got permission to do so.
All right. My
We're
screen
seeing
now
you,
shows the
Richard.
slideshow. Hang on. Share entire screen.
That's
There
probably
we go.
the easiest way to do it. That's better.
Yeah. Is that better?
It's coming.
Right.
There we are. Yeah, we can see you.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, John, for that introduction. So I hope I live up to the introduction I've just had. So welcome, everybody. I hope you enjoy this. And we're all familiar with ammonites. They're quite often seen as objects of beauty, and indeed some people collect them as ornaments. And there's a lot you can learn from perfect specimens. For example, you can figure out things like growth rates. You can use isotope analysis to tell you about paleo temperatures. But at the end of the day, a perfect ammonite just tells you one story. It hatched, it grew to adulthood, it died. And although they're beautiful, there's a limit to how much we can learn from them. But when we start looking at the pathological specimens, they can tell us so much more about paleobiology and paleoecology. Just to give you a short rundown, a damaged or deformed ammonite, there could be predation damage, it could be infestation by parasites, attachment by epizoans, or indeed it could be some kind of illness or a genetic mutation that's responsible. And how the ammonite responds to those gives us a glimpse into paleobiology and paleoecology that would otherwise be denied to us. If you were studying a modern ecosystem, you could go out there and watch these biological interactions and observe the animals and plants interacting, but we can't do that. It'd be great if we did have a time machine, but there's so much that we can't observe as a result of only being able to see the fossils themselves. However, the traces of those interactions, the pathologies, can give us an insight into these interactions. And There you go. That's one of my favorites, an Eleganticeros found recently. So there's an example of a perfect specimen. But moving on, so far there's been 44 different pathologies named in ammonites. The convention is to give them the name forma agra, followed by a name linked to the appearance or cause of the pathology. And some of them, we'll be having a look at some of them as we go. Some of them, such as forma agra verticata, are clear the result of injury, but others, like forma agra genusa that we're going to see soon, it's not clear whether that pathology is the result of injury, parasitism, or perhaps a genetic defect. Before we go, some ammonites did succumb to their injuries, and we'll be coming back to those later, because the first specimens of predated ammonites from the upper Lias of Yorkshire were identified back in 2012, and that's going to be the main focus of tonight. But I'm going to come back to those later, because I would just like to give you a taster of ammonite pathologies, and these are my particular favourites that I think offer a good insight into ammonite ecology and biology. So this is one I mentioned a few moments ago, forma agra genusa, and you can see it's a specimen of Hildoceras bifrons. If you look at the image on the left, you can see the ribbing pattern and the sculpture is a typical Hildoceras bifrons. But when you look on the right, the spiral groove that's evident on this side of the specimen is completely missing. It looks more akin to a specimen of Grammoceras that stratigraphically follows Hildoceras in the succession. The ribbing extends all the way from the umbilicus to the venter. Now, some people have labelled these as hybrids, but they're not. It is genuinely the same ammonite, just different ribbing patterns on left and right. If you're wondering, it's Genusa after the Roman god Janus, the two-faced god, the month January is named after. And as I said, it isn't a real hybrid, but something has clearly gone wrong with this ammonite. And I suspect in this particular case, because you can follow the ribbing all the way back to the protoconch there, it looks as if this one has some kind of genetic defect. And the interest for me in this comes about because when you look at the plasticity there of the ammonite's ability to form its ribs, it offers us some insights into how the genome worked and how evolution could work on ribbing patterns. This is another of my favourite ones. This is a specimen of Peronoceras fibulatum, which rejoices in the title of Forma agra undata sparata. And as you can see, where an ammonite would normally be completely vertical when held edge on like this, you can see that this one's swinging to one side, and the suspicion is that something such as an oyster had settled on the shell, causing it to be unbalanced, and so the ammonite grew off center like this in order to counteract that extra weight. This one is another Dactylosaurus athleticum, and this pathology rejoices in the name of Forma agra verticata. I'm sure you'll agree some of these names are tongue twisters, and you can see clearly in this case that this particular ammonite has been attacked by something there. People suspect it may be something like a lobster that did this kind of damage, but obviously you can't prove that. But the damage caused has left a permanent injury to the shell producing part of the mantle. And as you can see then, as you follow the spiral around, it creates this characteristic scar or groove, which lasted the rest of the ammonite's life. Okay, this is another one, a specimen of Promorhizosauros from down in Dorset. You can see, apologies it's slightly off centre, but you can see there's a serpulid worm tube attached to the venter of this ammonite. The great thing about these is because we know from extant serpulids how fast they grow, and it's thought that the serpulid kept pace with the growth of the ammonite, so it had a consistent orientation compared to the ammonite's aperture. We can then use that serpulid's growth rate to estimate the growth rate of the ammonite itself. So as you can see, these are quite interesting in terms of insights into paleobiology they offer us and the paleoecology. The next pathology I'm going to show you is my particular favourite, and this is a specimen of Dactylioceras I collected myself at Saltwick Bay some 7 or 8 years ago. And from a distance, it just looks like a completely normal Dactylioceras. But in close-up there, and in the close-up on this side, you can see that there's an abrupt change in the ribbing pattern. Now, this is thought to be caused when the predators attack the Ammonite. It's a failed attack in that the Ammonite survived it and was able to regenerate the shell. But as you can see, the ribs are misaligned. So that tells us clearly it survived. And it also gives an indication that when you look at the ribbing pattern, that angle of ribs will be consistent with the aperture being about here when the Ammonite was attacked. So the Ammonite's pulled its soft body back to there, resulting in the misaligned ribs. And I think this one's particularly cool because it shows us that it survived the attack, but it also reveals something about the Ammonite's ability to withdraw its body into its shell. Because in this case, to repair that damage, this Ammonite pulled its soft body back around 90 degrees from what would have been the aperture at the time it was attacked. But of course, really tonight, the meat of the talk is these, the bitten ones. Again, these are from my personal collection. They were first discovered in Germany, and then back in 2010, I believe, Chris Andrew and partners down in Dorset published a paper in the Proceedings of the YGS on fatally bitten ammonites from Dorset. Now, at this point, I must make a confession, because although we've gone with the title of Who Bit My Ammonite, the Pathologist's Tale, strictly speaking, this isn't a pathology. Because the Ammonite itself was killed, what we're actually looking at is a trace fossil, the trace of the predator's attack. But having come up with that title of Who Bit My Ammonite, the Pathologist's Tale, I couldn't resist using it. Now, at the top of the page there, you can see the name this trace fossil has been given. And if you feel like pronouncing that, be my guest, because you're a braver soul than I am. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that tonight. So they have that characteristic name, and the damage done by the predator leaves these characteristic semicircular or U-shaped notches in the shell, sorry. And oops, I don't know why that says good luck there, but this was, oh, I do now. Sometimes paleontology discoveries can be down to sheer good luck. I'm sure you've heard the stories of people being in the right place at the right time when they made their finds. And this particular story, the bitten ammonites we're going to focus on tonight, is a case of right time, right place, and just happened to have read the right article. I'd planned my trip to Saltwick Bay for a good few weeks, and it was on a Saturday, and the Friday night beforehand, literally, a few hours before I went, I happened to read this paper in the Proceedings of the YGS, the fatally bitten ammonites from the Lower Lias group of Dorset. And the morning after, I found this particular specimen. Now, if I hadn't read the article the night before, I would have looked at that and gone, it's a damaged ammonite, it's not intact, I'm not after those, I would have left it on the beach. But having picked it up, something in my head looked at it and went, hang on a minute, this is one of these bitten ones that I was reading about last night. So as I say, just sheer good luck, right time, right place, and reading the right article. But having to realise that it's damaged, we've then got to look at how do we know what caused the damage? How do we work it out? And can we be certain this is actually an act of predation rather than something like taphonomic damage caused either pre-burial or post-burial? And to work that out, well, there have been several suggestions: accidental collision post-mortem, a post-mortem blowout, post-mortem crushing, or of course the act of predation itself. Now, I have to admit the post-mortem blowout one strikes me as quite amusing because there's a picture in my head of the ammonites laid on the sea floor. Something comes along and then there's this little explosion and rotting ammonite and decomposition gases burst out of the opening here. However, I have to admit, I find that one very difficult to believe because I know the people who've argued for it suggest that the blowout happened at what was a weak point in the ammonite shell, namely the last suture at the start of the body chamber. But that doesn't work because, as I'll show you, these gaps, this damage is in a consistent location relative to the aperture, and yet different ammonite species, such as this Dactylioceras, the body chamber can extend all the way around to here, but some of the Dorset specimens, the body chamber ends here. So the postmortem blowout idea doesn't really work if it was that last suture, last suture part of the body chamber that caused it. So I'll skip over that slide before I discussed it. So the key bit to working out whether this is accidental or deliberate, and this is the other specimen that I discovered that day, is to work out where the damage is relative to the aperture. So as you can see, it was easy to do this on a photograph. So you take a photograph, draw onto it where the aperture is, with a line from the aperture to the center there, and then you mark off the start of the damage there, D1, the end of the damage section there, D2, and then from that calculate the midpoint of the damage, which then gives us this angle AM from the aperture to the midpoint of the damage. And what we see when we do that is that consistently the damage is located somewhere around 180, 190, 200 degrees from the aperture. It's, I believe, the average figure when you look at the different specimens, Promicroceras, Dactylioceras, the Asteroceras that have all been seen with this predation down in Dorset, that the average of the midpoint of the damage is 190 degrees from the aperture. Now, this method is different from the one Andrew et al. Used in their paper, but by measuring the angles, it does allow direct comparison between different size specimens, and it also has the advantage of it's independent of the ammonite's actual size. So having established this regularity, the question becomes, what could have caused this? Now, a consistent pattern like this, if it was taphonomic damage or some post-mortem crushing or post-mortem collision, it'd be very, very odd to see this damage consistently at 190 degrees from the aperture. So Kloppenmacher, who published the German papers, and Andrew and his partners who published the Dorset paper, suggested that as this damage is so consistent, it has to be something that is capable of manipulating the ammonites into a preferred position before biting. And animals like Ichthyosaurs, for example, could easily have bitten an ammonite, but would have probably crushed the entire body chamber. You do see that sort of damage in predated ammonites from America, where mosasaurs, for example, have had a go at them. If it was something like a fish, possibly, but you'd expect it to be a bit more random because fish generally don't have the limbs necessary to manipulate ammonites in the way that we see where the damage is then consistent. So the suggestion from Kloppenmacher and Andrew et al. Was that these specimens were victims of something that could manipulate them, and that something would be a coleoid cephalopod. And interestingly enough, just before my paper was published on these specimens, Wright et al. Published in 2014 in the Proceedings of the YGS that there were upper Jurassic ammonites from Tennant's Cliff in Scarborough, where they too reached a similar conclusion and suggested it was a coleoid cephalopod, and I think they suggested it could have been a squid that did it. And as you'll appreciate, a squid has got the arms, it has the ability to manipulate things, and mouse and is quite intelligent animals as well. So they would be able to do this, manipulate them round, bite in the preferred position, And if you're wondering why that particular position, in most of the ammonites, the muscles that secure the ammonite soft body into the body chamber are located at towards the rear of the body chamber here. So by biting the ammonite here, you would sever those muscles, which would then allow the predator to extract the soft body from the shell with a minimum of effort. And interestingly enough, it's also been pointed out that given the ammonite soft body is down here and its eyes will be here, that an approach from this side would quite possibly be in the ammonite's blind spot, making it difficult for it to evade the predator, as well as being an ideal spot for severing the muscles and thus allowing easy extraction of the ammonite soft body. So here's a suggestion for the culprit. The two Dactylosaurus you've seen are on display in the Yorkshire Museum's fossil gallery, and I believe if you look carefully at the photograph, you can see one of them just there. And I didn't realise they'd actually put these on display when they revamped the fossil gallery, but the two ammonites you've seen are there with the label underneath explaining what they are, and in my claim to fame, my name's on that label. But I found this model to be rather delightful in that you can see the squid there, and wrapped up in its arms, there is one Dactylosaurus just there, and the other one I think is somewhere around here, although it's a bit hard to see in this photograph. But I have to admit, I find that a rather delightful reconstruction showing how the squid or the coleoid cephalopod would have gone about attacking the ammonites. But hopefully, in showing you that, I've convinced you that this is predation damage. But there are still some questions I feel aren't answered yet, because so far we've got examples from the Middle Jurassic. There's examples of predated ammonites from the Lower Jurassic, the Lower Lias down in Dorset, and we've got these two examples and this particular specimen that's also from Saltwick Bay that suggests predation, but so far that seems to be it. And interestingly enough, by the way, this specimen, you can see the missing chunk there. This one was a rather bizarre one to prepare because none of this was visible apart from the very tip of the aperture there when I found it. But in preparing this specimen, I found that this was quite soft, and this chunk here was very, very hard, very pyritic, and indeed very black compared to the rest of it. As I've been speculating on what that might be for a while, and the jury's still out. Is it just rock that hasn't been softened by exposure, or is it representative of something else? Because I know that where pyrite is, you tend to have something organic. So I know people have suggested to me at the open day at the Mining Museum last year that that could be a remnant of the ammonite soft body, but I wouldn't like to speculate myself. What I can tell you is when I was preparing it, that part was so hard, it actually broke the point on the hairpin. But going back to the point I was making, the two you've seen that are now in the Yorkshire Museum on the display there, and this particular one, are all from Saltwick Bay. They're all specimens of Dactylosaurus from the upper layers, from the Toarcian. But when you look at the examples from Dorset, they were saying that in some of the nodules there, they get 30, 40, 50% of the ammonites show these predation marks. And then we get to Yorkshire and, well, where are they? By analogy, there should be many, many more examples than there are of these predated ammonites when you look at what you see down in the Dorset specimens, the Dorset nodules. And there should be from different genera. But at the moment, we've only got these three Dactylosaurus, all from Saltwick Bay. And I find it rather hard to believe that if the coleoid cephalopods are about, that Dactylosaurus were the only ones they were preying on. And I know they were there because I do have examples of them in my own collection. I've got an example of a vampiromorph in my collection. So the coleoid cephalopods are there, but why are there so few Yorkshire specimens being recognised compared to Dorset? So it's a question I'm still working on. I keep looking every time I manage to get to the coast. And I just, well, it rather puzzles me. Where are the other genera? where are the lower Lias ones, where are the middle Lias ones, and why don't we see, for example, Paranoceros being predated, Hildoceros, Eleganticeros? There's so many different ammonites that they could have been attacked, but I'm still back to the mystery. Why only these three? So that brings me to the end of this. I know it's been a bit shorter perhaps than expected, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And any questions?
Thanks, Richard. Just
I hope
before,
you can see me again.
yeah, just before Richard, I look and see that there are any questions. Just to tell people that Richard will probably have some of these specimens on show at the Coal Mining Museum on the 29th of April. And
I'll certainly be bringing that last one with me.
Yeah, okay. And also, Richard is also giving a talk in the afternoon on a different topic, still ammonites, but what did we call it, Richard, in the end? Did ammonites have a front door?
Called it did ammonites have front doors?
Yes, that's right. So looking at the apticae of ammonites. So Richard's going to talk on that topic as well as display in the morning. So thanks for collaborating with us on that, Richard. So any questions through the, let's have a look and see.
Doesn't seem to be anything yet.
Nothing yet, I don't think.
While we wait, I've got one for you, Richard. You said about that it might not be the blowout model because that is thought to be a weak point between the back of the body chamber and the start of the sort of phragma cone area. But then you said that you suspect that the biting is done at the back of the body chamber.
That's true, yes.
Like, does that not preclude the idea that it is a blowout still?
Yes, I mean, I don't want to mention any names, but there's a certain well-known fossil shop in Whitby. And the post-mortem blowout was the proprietor of that shop. That was his idea. But interestingly enough, I'd always understood that the sutures were perhaps strengthening the chamber walls myself, especially given the complexity of some of them. Especially like some of the complex fluting you can see on some of the sutures, and when you see them end on the cat's paws, as they're called. So I was rather puzzled to see them suggested as weak spots. And the other thought that occurred to me there is, if this is post-mortem caused by decomposition gases, you'd surely expect the aperture to be the easiest route for the gases to escape because it's already an open point in the shell.
Via through the sort of, unless it's like a strange blockage in the siphuncle or something. But yeah, make a good point.
Yeah, see, that's what puzzled me about it. And interestingly enough, when I last popped in that fossil shop a couple of years ago, there was an Asteroceros with that characteristic U-shaped mark, labelled and on sale as a bitten ammonite. So I didn't pluck up the case to ask him whether he changed his mind. But it was interesting to see that, having argued against this bitten theory, there he was selling them as bitten ammonites.
Yeah.
Another thing, how you haven't found them in any other species. Do you think that it could be anything to do with the way that Dactyloceros is living, perhaps, with it not being one of the more streamlined varieties, not the torpedo cross-section ones? Do you think it was easier to catch, perhaps?
It could be, couldn't it? Because I certainly know, so like you say, being a serpenticone instead of an oxycone, it's not as streamlined, it's presumably not as fast moving. But it sort of baffles me that there seem to be so few of them. And it's like, I mean, say there's only those three that I found personally.
And the comparison.
Yeah, it's especially in comparison to Dorset. I know the German specimens are Dactyloceros as well. So, I mean, could it be something as simple as the presence of the predators themselves? Were the coleoid cephalopods, the vampiromorphs, as I suspect, more common in Dorset than they were in the upper Lias of Yorkshire? That's a question I don't have the data to answer at the moment.
What age are the Dorset predated specimens?
This said, I think this is Cinemorian.
So it could
If I
also be
remember
an
right.
effect of the time, or I mean, don't know which units they were from. Certainly more
And
anoxic.
one thought that has occurred to me on that is that when you look at the Yorkshire Dactylioceras, they are quite a bit larger than things like the Promicroceras from Dorset on the whole. And certainly when I've chatted to Chris Andrew about it in the past, he did actually say, you know, when I showed him those specimens, because we did meet up that summer down in Dorset, that the Dacs were at the upper size limit of the predated ones in Dorset. So it could simply be that the sheer size of the Dacs was protecting them against predation by the coleoids. But then again, you've got the juveniles, the immature ones. You know, they obviously wouldn't be protected by the same size, you know, that the adults would be. So again, you know, where are they? I mean, is it something as simple as collection bias again, that people are out there and just not picking them up because they go, oh, it's damaged, I don't want a damaged one.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a couple of questions coming, Jed. I don't know if you are you able to make.
I can unmute people. Yeah. You want to go first?
The first one's from Rory Allen.
Rory, you should be able to speak now.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the talk, Richard. Really interesting. Just to say, I also read that 2010 paper, and I was very taken by it as well. Now, my question was, do you see any evidence that the Ammonites are being attacked by smaller predators, or I suppose you might almost call them parasites? You know, like today we see mollusks like dog whelks are very good at attaching themselves to other members of the phylum and boring into them and then killing them and consuming them or parasitizing them. Is there any evidence with ammonites that you had these sort of hold with beveled edges that might indicate that they had smaller things to cope with than you know, than the cephalopods?
So there isn't any evidence that I've come across anywhere. You know, certainly not in personal experience and in any of the papers I've been able to locate and read. I mean, I suspect you might be right in suggesting that with ammonites being mobile and not necessarily benthic or living in the sediment, that such as something like a dog whelk would have had difficulty attacking it. So I suspect you're right in suggesting that. Certainly there's no evidence that I'm aware of. There is evidence of things like, how do you pronounce it now? Disciniska, is it? The brachiopod? That Disciniska, that's it, thank you. There's evidence of those settling on live ammonites and sometimes being overgrown as the ammonites growth has continued. I mean, that's a pathology I didn't mention, but you can see that, and it causes a bit of kink in the ammonite's wall as it grew. So I think I've got a Dactylorsus somewhere where you can see that, and it's almost got a right angle in the shell as it overgrew the I can't say it, the Disciniska. You know, the brachiopod. Disciniska, yeah. It says it overgrew the Disciniska. So it's quite good when you see that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Rory. There's a question as well, Jed, from Adam Thomas Bogar. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Adam Thomas Bogar. We can make him live.
Okay, yeah. Adam should be able to speak now. You're muted though, Adam.
No, I can see the question anyway.
Okay.
So the answer to your question, Adam, is there are bitten specimens from other part of the world. The German specimens, as far as I recall, are Dactylioceras. I'm not sure exactly which species, but it's the same genus as the Yorkshire ones seen here. The Dorset specimens, there's Promicroceras. I think there's a Zipheroceras example that's been predated. There's an Asteroceras. I think that's the range that I can remember off the top of my head. And they do all show that same sort of pathology, the same about 180 degrees, 190 degrees from the aperture. It's the same characteristic U-shaped or crescent-shaped mark. There are a couple of interesting ones from Dorset where it looks as if the predators had a couple of bites at it, in that the bite mark is wider than you'd normally see. So it's broken a greater chunk of shell off than you'd expect from a single bite. But say the best thing I can suggest there is if you try and look up that 2010 paper by Andrew et al., that's got some great specimens in it. I know the YGS one is behind a paywall, but I believe if you look at the Philpott Museum, the Lyme Regis Museum, they have a summary online that's free to read with some great photographs. You see some great examples there of different genera that show the same, well, we're saying pathology, but technically the same trace fossil as these two Yorkshire Dactylioceras. So I hope that's answered your question, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Those are the only 2 questions so far. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. Get them typed in if you have. Doesn't look like it. Anything else from any of the panelists?
Do you always finish or do the vote of thanks?
I think so. Yes, there's nothing rushing in.
Richard, super talk. It really was a super talk. Yeah, it's another part of this great story of as we're moving from paleontology to paleobiology, and silent witness taken to an extreme.
Yeah,
I've never thought of it like that.
and you know, examples of kind of off-center growth, kinky ammonites. Coming around the back and biting their backs and getting rid of their soft parts so that you can, or getting rid of the muscular attachments so you can. It's just a great story, and what a super tale to tell. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so thank you so much once again, Richard, for giving us another great talk. And yeah,
You're welcome.
I hope lots and lots of people are there to listen to the talk at the Coal Mining Museum, and we get more and more publications as well coming out from you in the proceedings. So it'd be great to see that. But thank you so much for coming in. Also for trying so desperately hard, going through various laptops. Educated, and thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. We'll see you at
The
Cap
next
House Collier.
webinar is on.
At the-
John, hang on a second. Hang on, John. Next webinar, so in a month's time, on the 27th of April, but at 4 o'clock this time, back to the 4 o'clock time. Dr. Elsa Pancaroli from the Oxford Museum of Natural History is going to talk about British Mesozoic fossils and what we find about the emergence of mammal traits in them. And then a month on from that, we've got Richard Thompson from Plymouth University talking about marine litter. Richard's a kind of a worldwide expert, very, very famous and well known. So it's a great opportunity for Richard to come and give us a webinar. And in between that, we've got the Coal Mining Museum Day in the Yorkshire Geology Day on April the 29th in Barnsley. So those are the main ones. And then hopefully the Liverpool Carbonates meeting will happen in early June. So thank you all for coming and joining us. Take care. And thank you again, Richard.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. See you at Cap House.
You will do.
Okay,
Complete
good.
with ammonites.
I've got your table booked.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Just,
Okay.
recording then.